I started working the night shift at the hospital last winter. It was supposed to be an easy gig. Quiet halls, a few rounds, maybe a call or two from the nurses on duty. The pay was decent, and I liked the idea of having a place to myself at night. The first few hours were calm. I walked the corridors, scanning empty rooms and listening to the soft hum of the fluorescent lights. Everything smelled faintly of disinfectant and metal. Around midnight, I reached the old surgical wing. It had been shut down years ago, according to my supervisor. The doors were supposed to stay locked, but one of them was slightly open. I remember shining my flashlight through the gap, seeing nothing but dust floating in the beam. I figured maybe maintenance forgot to close it. Still, something about that open door made me uneasy. I pulled it shut and moved on. But as I walked away, I heard the faintest sound, like someone dragging their feet behind the wall. I froze, listening. It stopped the moment I turned back. I told myself it was just pipes or air vents. Hospitals always make weird noises, right? When I got back to the security room, I looked at the monitors. Every camera showed still hallways except one. The feed for the old surgical wing was flickering. I hadn't even realized that area still had power. I stared at it for a minute, and I swear I saw something, a shadow, move past the frame. But when I blinked, it was gone. By my second night, I'd convinced myself the first was just nerves. Old buildings creak, cameras glitch, shadows play tricks when you're tired. Still, I couldn't shake that uneasy feeling. Every time I passed the hallway leading to the old surgical wing, the air felt heavier, like the temperature dropped a few degrees. Around 2 a.m., I decided to check the wing again, just to get it out of my head. The lock on the door looked fine, but when I pushed it, it opened with a low groan. I knew I'd shut it the night before. Inside, the lights were dim, only a few flickering overhead. The walls were yellowed with age, paint peeling in thin sheets. Dust coated everything, except for a set of footprints leading down the hall. They weren't mine. I followed them slowly, my flashlight trembling just slightly in my hand. They led to an operating room with an old metal table still bolted to the floor. I could hear something faint in there, like a slow, rhythmic tapping. I moved closer, scanning the corners. Nothing. Just that table and a few old cabinets. Then the light flickered out for half a second. When it came back, I noticed something that hadn't been there before. A chair, turned toward the table. On it lay a single patient chart, clean and recent, with my name typed neatly on the label. My heart dropped. The pages were blank, but I didn't stay to check the rest. I left the wing and shut the door hard, locking it twice this time. By the third night, I was on edge. Every sound in the hospital seemed sharper, louder, the hum of the lights, the distant beeping of machines, even my own footsteps echoed in the empty corridors. I tried to stay focused on rounds, making sure every door was locked and every hallway clear. But the thought of the surgical wing kept creeping into my mind. Around 3 a.m., I walked past the wing again, and that's when I heard it. A soft whisper. At first, I thought it was the ventilation, but the whisper was clearer this time. My name. "Are you here?" it asked. Almost gentle, almost human. I froze, scanning the dark hallway with my flashlight. Nothing. I shook my head, telling myself I was imagining things. But then I felt it. A presence, cold and heavy, right behind me. I spun around, flashlight trembling in my hand, and saw nothing. Just the empty hallway, silent and still. I forced myself to continue my rounds, but the feeling didn't leave. Every corner I passed felt watched, every shadow too dark. When I returned to the security room, I checked the cameras again. The surgical wing feed was blank, static filling the screen. For a moment, I thought it was another glitch, but then I saw it. In the corner of the frame, just barely visible, a figure was standing there, pale and still, facing me. The blink of an eye later, it was gone. My hands shook as I shut the monitor off. I couldn't stay in that room any longer. Something was in the hospital with me, and I had no idea what it wanted. By my fourth night, I'd barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pale figure from the monitor, standing there like it had been waiting for me all along. My supervisor didn't seem to notice anything wrong. He just handed me the keys, told me to keep an eye on the East Wing, and left like it was any other night. I made my rounds faster this time, determined to stay away from the surgical wing. But the hospital felt different, colder. Even the hum of the lights sounded distorted, like it was echoing from somewhere deep underground. When I passed the wing's door, it was wide open. My stomach dropped. I hadn't even touched it tonight. I called out softly, "Hello?" knowing no one should be in there. No answer. I stepped inside. The footprints were back, but this time there were more, scattered like someone had been pacing the halls for hours. I followed them to the same operating room. The table was still there, but now the chair with the patient chart was gone. In its place stood a hospital bed, old and rusted, its sheets perfectly smooth except for one deep indentation, as if someone had been lying there. I felt my breath catch. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic, but beneath it was another scent. Sweet, almost like rotting flowers. I turned to leave, but the door behind me slammed shut so hard it rattled the glass windows. My flashlight flickered and went out completely. For a moment, there was nothing but darkness and the sound of my own heartbeat. Then, in the corner of the room, I heard it again. The whisper. Closer this time, saying my name. This time it didn't sound like a question. It sounded like a promise. By the fifth night, I couldn't shake the dread that had been building for days. I was tired, tense, and jumping at every sound, but I had one last round to complete before my shift ended. I told myself I just needed to finish, grab my keys, and leave. As I approached the surgical wing, the lights in the hallway flickered violently. I could see the open door from down the hall, and inside, a dim glow pulsed as if the room itself were alive. My flashlight barely illuminated the floor, but I could make out the footprints leading straight to the operating table. When I stepped inside, the cold hit me like a wall. The air was thick, stagnant, and smelled faintly of antiseptic mixed with something metallic. The bed was empty, but the shadow of a figure stretched across the floor, long and thin. I froze, heart pounding. Then it moved, slowly, deliberately. Not walking, but gliding, as if it had no legs. The shadow stretched up the walls, curling like smoke. I ran for the door, fumbling with the lock, but it wouldn't budge. Behind me, I could hear a soft, wet, dragging sound moving closer. I turned just enough to see it, pale, featureless, and taller than any human should be. It reached for me, and I stumbled backwards, screaming. When I hit the floor and scrambled to my feet, the lights snapped on. The room was empty. The bed was normal, the door unlocked, the footprints gone. I quit that night. I never went back. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still hear it whispering my name. And I know that the hospital didn't let me go entirely. Something stayed behind, watching, waiting. I started working the night shift as a cleaner in the office building a few months ago. My first night was supposed to be simple. Mop the floors, empty trash cans, and make sure the break rooms were tidy. The office was empty except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional HVAC creak. I liked the solitude at first. It gave me time to think and zone out while I worked. Around 11 p.m., I was finishing the third floor when I noticed one of the office's lights flickering. I checked my schedule. No one was supposed to be here. The door was closed when I started my rounds, but now it was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, expecting an empty office, maybe a loose wire or a dying bulb. The room was empty, but something felt off. The chair was tilted as if someone had stood up in a hurry. Papers were scattered across the floor, even though I had cleaned them earlier. I stepped inside and heard a faint tap, like a pen falling on the desk. But no one was there. I shook my head and told myself it was just nerves. Buildings make noises at night. Lights flicker, doors shift, shadows play tricks. I went back to the hallway and locked the door behind me. Yet as I walked down the corridor, I could have sworn I saw the chair in that office slowly turn to face me, even though the door was closed. I didn't stop to check. I finished my round quickly and returned to the stairwell, trying to calm myself. Something in that building didn't belong to me, or anyone else who worked there. And I had a sinking feeling I was about to find out exactly what it was. The building felt different once the night fully settled in. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, echoing down the empty corridors. I pushed the mop across the polished tiles, trying to focus on the work. But something kept catching my eye. A flicker in the corner of my vision. A movement that vanished the moment I turned to look. When I reached the break room, the door creaked shut behind me. I froze. The handle wobbled under my grip, but it didn't budge. The air inside felt colder, heavier, and a faint scratching sound came from the far wall, like fingernails dragging slowly over wood. My stomach tightened. I stepped back, shining my flashlight into the shadows. They pooled near the corners of the room, stretching unnaturally, as if something was pressing against the edges of the light. Then I heard a whisper. Not words I could recognize, just a low, deliberate murmur that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It made my skin crawl. I forced the door open and stumbled into the hallway. The lights flickered violently, and for a brief moment, I saw it. A human-shaped shadow standing at the far end of the corridor. It didn't move, but it radiated intent, like it was waiting for me to make a mistake. When I blinked, it was gone, but the chill it left lingered, deep in my chest. I forced myself to continue cleaning, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The shadows weren't just shapes, they were something watching, patient and deliberate, and they knew I could see them. The storage room at the end of the third floor had always been quiet, cluttered with dusty boxes and forgotten office supplies. That night, the air smelled faintly of mildew and something metallic, like old paper cut by steel. I was finishing up the hallway when I heard it. A soft tapping, rhythmic, coming from behind the storage door. I paused, flashlight in hand, listening. The tap repeated, steady and deliberate, like someone drumming their fingers on a desk. I told myself it was just a loose pipe, but the sound seemed to move, coming closer, echoing along the walls. My pulse quickened. I opened the door cautiously. The room was empty, just stacks of boxes and the old shelving unit I had bumped into earlier. The light from my flashlight danced across the walls, but nothing moved. I stepped further inside, and then I noticed it. A single box, toppled onto the floor, its contents, papers and office supplies, scattered in a perfect circle. The box hadn't been there before. A cold breeze brushed past my neck. I spun around, expecting someone to be standing behind me. No one. Only the faint echo of tapping from somewhere deeper in the room. It wasn't coming from the floor or the walls. It was coming from everywhere at once. I ran out, slamming the door behind me. The hallway stretched on, empty and silent, but I could feel it, like eyes pressed against my back. Something in the building was awake, waiting, and it knew I had noticed it. From that moment, the routine cleaning felt different, like every shadow, every creak, every flicker of light had a purpose. The elevators in the building made a low hum that night, softer than usual, almost like breathing. I was cleaning near the main lobby, where the entire wall was made of glass panels overlooking the empty parking lot. The reflections of the overhead lights shimmered faintly, and for a while, it felt almost peaceful. Then, in one of the glass panels, I saw something behind me. It was just a silhouette at first, tall, still, featureless. I turned around, expecting to catch whoever it was, but the hallway was empty. My chest tightened as I slowly looked back at the reflection. The figure was still there. Closer, I took a step back, the mop handle trembling in my grip. The glass distorted the reflection slightly, but I could see the shape more clearly now. A person, standing where I should have been seconds ago. I glanced over my shoulder again. Nothing. The glass was cold when I touched it. My breath fogged the surface, and the reflection flickered, like static on an old screen. When it cleared, the figure's head tilted slowly, mirroring me, though I hadn't moved. Then it smiled. I stumbled back so fast that the mop bucket tipped over, water spilling across the floor. The lights overhead flickered, humming louder, and when they steadied, the reflection was gone. Only my pale face stared back at me, wide-eyed and shaking. For the rest of the night, I couldn't bring myself to look at another reflective surface. But the strange thing was, every window I passed showed a faint handprint, as if something had pressed against the other side, watching me work. I almost didn't come back after that night, but bills have a way of silencing fear. When I clocked in again, the building felt heavier, as if the air itself was holding its breath. I told myself I'd finish early, skip the lower floors, and leave before anything strange could happen. But when I passed the elevator, the doors slid open on their own. The panel glowed faintly. Basement. I hadn't pressed a thing. The doors waited, unmoving, like they were inviting me in. Against every instinct, I stepped inside. The descent was slow, and the lights flickered with every passing floor. When the doors finally opened, I was met with darkness. No hum of machines, no echo of footsteps, just the smell of dust and cold concrete. My flashlight caught a glimpse of something painted on the far wall. Dozens of names scrawled in messy handwriting, each one crossed out. The last name at the bottom was mine. I dropped the mop handle and backed toward the elevator, but the doors had already closed. The button didn't respond. That's when I heard the tapping again, the same rhythm from the storage room, echoing from all around me. It was closer now, faster. I turned and saw the figure from the glass, standing just beyond the light. Its reflection shimmered faintly on the metal elevator door, smiling, motionless. I blinked, and it stepped forward, silent and fluid, as if it was gliding across the floor. The flashlight went out. I don't remember what happened after that. Security found the basement door locked from the inside the next morning. My mop and uniform were still down there, next to the elevator, but no one ever found me. I work the night shift at a small gas station just off Route 19. It's nothing special. 2 pumps, a buzzing sign that flickers every few seconds, and a store that always smells like burnt coffee and motor oil. Nights are usually uneventful. A few truckers stop for fuel, maybe a police cruiser passes by. But by 1 a.m., it's just me, the hum of the coolers, and the faint drone of insects outside. There's a rule for the night shift. Lock the doors after midnight. Not for thieves or drunks, but for the road, as my supervisor once said. He never explained what that meant, and I didn't press him. That night, around 1:30, a black sedan rolled into Pump 3. Headlights on, engine running. I waited for someone to step out, but no one did. After a few minutes, I grabbed my flashlight and stepped into the cold air. The only sounds were the crickets and the steady rumble of the idling car. When I reached the driver's side, my breath caught. The car was empty. The keys were still in the ignition, the dashboard lights glowing faintly. The seats were dry, but the windows were fogged, like someone had just been breathing inside. I turned back toward the store and froze. Through the glass door, I saw myself standing behind the counter, perfectly still, staring straight at me. Then the lights flickered. The figure vanished. When I spun back around, the car at Pump 3 was gone. Not a sound, not a trace. Just the faint outline of wet tire marks leading back toward the road. After that night, I told myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe fatigue, maybe a reflection. Working nights can mess with your head. But when I came in the next evening, something felt off the moment I unlocked the door. The air inside the store was colder than usual, sharp, like metal. The clocks on the wall had all stopped at 1:37 a.m. I reset them, brewed a pot of coffee, and told myself to forget about it. Around midnight, a soft thump came from the far aisle. I thought maybe a rat had knocked over one of the chip bags, but when I looked, nothing was out of place. I turned to go back, and that's when I saw it again. Movement through the front window. Someone was standing beside pump 3. Same black sedan parked there. The headlights were off this time, but the shape of a figure was visible against the faint glow of the streetlight. I reached for the door handle to go out, but it wouldn't turn. It was locked, even though I never locked it from the inside. The figure moved closer, and the light flickered once, stretching their shadow across the floor. I couldn't make out a face. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. When I finally got the door open and stepped outside, the air was completely still. The car was gone. The pumps were quiet. But under pump 3, on the damp concrete, were 2 footprints, small, barefoot, facing the store. I went back inside and checked the security feed. Every camera had frozen at 1:37 a.m., the exact same time the clocks had stopped. I didn't tell anyone about the second night. Who would believe it? Cameras freezing, cars vanishing, clocks stopping. It sounded ridiculous, even to me. But by the third night, I started to dread going in. The air around that place felt heavier, like the walls were holding their breath. Around midnight, I checked the pumps. Nothing unusual. A delivery truck passed on the highway, its headlights cutting through the dark for a few seconds before fading away. Then, just after 1, the power flickered. Only once, long enough for the lights to dim and the freezers to hum louder. That's when I heard it. A faint tapping. Not from outside, from the storage room behind the counter. I walked slowly toward it, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The tapping stopped. Then came 3 slow knocks from the other side of the metal door. I called out, thinking maybe someone had gotten locked in earlier. No answer. I unlatched the door and pulled it open. Nothing. Just the faint smell of gasoline and cleaning fluid. I shut it quickly and turned back toward the front of the store. Someone was standing behind the counter, not moving, not speaking, just standing exactly where I had been seconds ago. The light flickered again, and the figure was gone. My reflection in the freezer door looked wrong, my head tilted at an angle I hadn't made. When I looked away, the reflection stayed like that. That was the first time I seriously considered quitting. But something kept me from walking out. It felt like if I left, whatever was happening there wouldn't stop. It would follow me. The next night, I showed up early, before sunset. I thought maybe being there while it was still light would make it easier. The air inside the store was still cold, but the clocks were working again. Everything looked normal. Too normal. I went through the usual routine, stocked the shelves, swept the floor, checked the pumps. Nothing out of place. By midnight, I started to think maybe it had all been exhaustion. Maybe I'd finally caught up on sleep. Then, just past 1 a.m., the station phone rang. No one ever called that phone. Not customers, not even my boss. I stared at it for a few seconds before answering. There was silence at first, then faint breathing, slow, steady, like someone was standing right on the other end, listening. I said hello twice. On the third time, a voice whispered, "You forgot to lock the door." I froze. My eyes went to the front entrance. It was closed, but the lock was turned down. I hung up the phone and ran to secure it, heart pounding. When I looked through the glass, I saw movement near pump 3 again. A person, or what looked like one, crouched beside the pump. Their head tilted upward, facing the store. I backed away and turned off the lights inside, hoping they'd think no one was there. But from the dark reflection on the window, I saw a shape move behind me, inside the store. When I turned, there was nothing there. Only the faint smell of gasoline and footprints on the floor, leading from the door to where I stood. Barefoot. Wet. I didn't go back for 2 days after that. I told the manager I was sick, but truthfully, I couldn't make myself drive down that road. Still, something kept gnawing at me. The need to see it again, to prove to myself that it wasn't real. On the third night, I finally went back. When I pulled into the lot, the pumps were dark. The entire building looked dead. My key still worked, but the door opened on its own before I could turn the handle. The inside was silent except for a faint buzzing, like the power was barely alive. Every clock inside read 1:37 a.m. again. I walked behind the counter and checked the monitors. Only one camera worked, the one facing pump 3. On the screen, I could see a black sedan sitting there, headlights off. The footage wasn't live. It was looping, repeating the same few seconds. A man getting out of the driver's seat, walking toward the store, then freezing mid-step. That's when I realized the man on the screen was wearing my uniform. The lights flickered. I looked toward the window. The reflection staring back at me wasn't mine anymore. The head was tilted, eyes darker, mouth slightly open, as if trying to say something. The front door creaked open, and cold air swept through the store. The smell of gasoline filled my lungs. I reached for the door, but my hand wouldn't move. The reflection did, though, slowly raising its hand and pointing behind me. When I turned, the monitor was blank. Only the faint sound of an engine idling somewhere outside. They say the station's been closed for months now. But if you drive down Route 19 after midnight, sometimes the lights still flicker on.